"You're handsome. You know that." The words slipped into the quiet hallway of the Hartman estate with a softness that didn't match the shock they carried, landing in Elijah Brooks's chest like a sudden spark. He froze mid-movement, one hand still steadying the wall plate of the garage-fed bedroom light he had just restored. The copper hum inside the wiring settled into a warm glow, but something inside him felt newly unsteady, as if a circuit in his own chest had been jolted. He looked up. Arielle Hartman stood there in the doorway, barefoot on the polished floorboards, dressed in a simple linen dress that didn't need effort to look elegant. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't teasing. She wasn't performing the way wealthy clients sometimes did when they wanted to be flattering without meaning a thing they said. She was simply stating the truth as she saw it. And that was what rattled him most. Elijah thanked her quietly, more cautious than confused, his voice catching in that space between habit and surprise. Compliments were not unfamiliar in his line of work, but they usually came layered with condescension or playful superiority. This one did not. It was direct, honest, and spoken with the same tone she had used earlier when she asked whether he preferred almond milk or regular in his coffee. Since stepping into this house barely an hour ago, Elijah had sensed a subtle shift in the air around her. Something about the way she looked at people, as if she was painting them in her mind, not judging them. But what he felt now was newer, stranger, harder to place. He cleared his throat and explained the repair in the careful, steady way he always did. The wiring feeding the upstairs lights had a loose grounding point where moisture likely seeped in. He replaced the connection, added a soft, stabilizing component, and secured the line so the flickering would stop for good. Arielle listened with the same intentness she had shown earlier when he asked for the breaker access panel. Her gaze was calm but attentive, the kind of gaze that made a man feel fully visible rather than scanned and dismissed. When he finished packing his tools, she stepped a little closer, arms loosely folded. "Do you have time for lunch?" He blinked. Lunch. He almost laughed at the simplicity of her question. Most homeowners handed him a check, a polite nod, and a quick goodbye. None invited him to lunch. And certainly not homeowners like her, women raised in circles where people like Elijah were expected to work quietly and disappear even more quietly. "There's a place nearby," she added. "They make a roast beef and caramelized onion sandwich that tastes better than it looks. My treat." His instinct was immediate. No, no because he had another job. No because lines existed for a reason. No because she lived in a world of gallery openings, charity brunches, and old money conversations he had never been invited into. But she didn't wait with the impatience of someone used to hearing yes. She waited with a softness that said she would accept whatever boundary he drew. "I appreciate it," he said, "but I have to get to another appointment." A half-truth, but enough. Arielle nodded once, not disappointed, just thoughtful. Then she extended her hand. He hesitated a fraction before shaking it. Her palm was warm, her grip firm, the opposite of the delicate socialite handshake he expected. As he walked out, he felt her attention following him. Not invasive, simply curious, like a painter studying the last stroke before putting the brush down. When he reached his truck, the afternoon sun was sharp, and the silence in the cab felt strangely loud. He drove away, telling himself to forget it. Forget her voice. Forget the way she said those 5 words. Forget the look in her eyes. But he couldn't. Not yet. Hours later, after finishing his next job and returning home to his small apartment above the barber shop, he opened his phone to log the day's work. A notification blinked at the bottom. A message from an unfamiliar number. "This is Arielle. In case you change your mind." He set the phone down without replying, not because he wasn't tempted, but because the last thing he wanted was to misread kindness as invitation. Elijah Brooks survived life by keeping things neat. Lines clear, boundaries straight, emotions tucked away like spare wires. Tonight, he would keep it that way. Or at least try. 3 days passed. Each time he saw that message, his thumb hovered over the reply box, formed a word, erased it, tried again, erased it once more. His mother's voice echoed in him, the one that taught him to be polite but careful, open but not naive, skilled but never presumptuous. On the 4th day, another message arrived. Roast beef and caramelized onions still on the menu. Saturday, 11:48. I'll drive. This time it wasn't a question. It was an invitation spoken with the same quiet confidence she had shown at the door. Elijah read it twice, then again. Standing in the supply aisle of a local hardware store, beneath the buzz of ceiling lights, he typed the shortest message he could trust himself with. "Okay, drop a pin." He hit send before his doubts could catch up. Something small cracked open inside him, a hairline fracture, subtle but impossible to ignore. He didn't know where this would lead, but he knew one thing as he slipped his phone back into his pocket. He wasn't ready to forget her voice. Not anymore. Saturday arrived too quickly for Elijah's comfort. He stood outside a neighborhood hardware shop in a crisp gray button-up, dark jeans, and boots polished just enough to show he cared without trying too hard. The air was clear, touched with that cool edge Charlotte sometimes carried before noon. He ran a hand over his jaw, checking if he'd trimmed evenly, then laughed at himself. Since when did he worry about something like that? At exactly 11:48, a midnight blue sedan eased into the parking lot. Sleek, silent. Arielle stepped out barefoot again, her hair pinned loosely, a paper lunch bag in her hand. There was no performance in her entrance, just a serenity that felt intentional. "You always show up barefoot?" he asked as she approached. "Only when I want to feel real," she replied with a light laugh. "Ready?" They drove out of the city without music, letting the hum of the tires speak for them. Brick buildings faded into long stretches of pine. The world grew quieter with every mile. After about 25 minutes, she turned onto a gravel path leading toward a river clearing surrounded by trees. A weathered pier reached out over the slow-moving water. No one else was in sight. Elijah stepped out first, scanning the area instinctively like he was checking a fuse box for safety. Arielle walked ahead, her barefoot steps pressing gently into the soft earth. They sat on the pier, unwrapped their sandwiches, and listened to the water. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. It was a silence that did not demand filling. When Arielle finally spoke, her voice carried the softness of a confession. "My grandmother used to bring me here. She said the water could wash away the things people made you carry." Elijah nodded, watching the current slide over stones. "Smart woman." "She raised me more than my parents did," Arielle said, brushing a stray hair from her cheek. "I learned early that quiet places mattered." He didn't push for more. He didn't need to. Some truths were better understood in silence. The air moved subtly between them, warmed by the sun but cooled by the river's breath. Arielle rested her hands behind her, leaning back. "Do you think I'm strange? Picking up a man I barely know, driving him to the woods without shoes?" "You're not strange," Elijah said. "Just unexpected. Is that a good thing? It is, he replied softly, if you've spent most of your life being overlooked. She regarded him then, not with pity, but with recognition. I don't overlook people. I noticed, he said. Another stretch of silence settled, lighter this time, threaded with something unnamed. She looked at him and asked gently, what if this, today, does belong to you? What if you're allowed to accept it? He met her eyes, but said nothing. Her question wasn't about the sandwich or the clearing. It was about worth. As the shadows stretched across the riverbank, Elijah finally stood. I should go. Arielle didn't move. Will you? She asked softly. Not if you ask me to stay. She smiled, small but sure. Then stay. He sat back down. They talked until the wind grew cool and the day turned the color of evening. Nothing dramatic. Favorite snacks, worst customers, childhood scars. Honest, simple things, the kind Elijah rarely shared. By the time he drove home that night, he realized the truth he had been resisting all week. Something was beginning. The morning sunlight felt thin and gentle, as if it didn't want to disturb anything that had begun unfolding quietly the day before. Elijah woke earlier than usual, not because an alarm told him to, but because something inside him had already stepped into the day before his eyes opened. It wasn't excitement, not exactly. It was something softer, steadier, a feeling he hadn't carried in years. Like standing in front of an open doorway and realizing the air on the other side feels a little different. He brewed coffee the way he always did, slow and precise. He cleaned his tools even though he wasn't taking them anywhere. He double-checked his shirt, tugging at the sleeves with a seriousness that would have made him laugh at himself if he had been fully awake yet. When he finally stepped outside, the light had turned warm enough to settle on his shoulders without making him aware of it. That was how the beginning of the day felt. Warm enough, gentle enough, quiet enough to hold possibility without announcing it. Arielle arrived a few minutes early. The midnight blue sedan glided to a stop with barely a whisper, the kind of quiet that made it seem intentional. She stepped out barefoot, as if the earth itself were something she wanted to feel directly. Her dress was loose, her hair softly pinned, and the paper bag in her hand carried the unmistakable scent of something toasted. She waved once, simply, openly, like someone greeting a familiar presence instead of a new one. "Did you sleep?" she asked when he approached. "Eventually," he said. She smiled, not teasing him for the answer, not asking what kept him awake, just taking the truth as he offered it. They drove out of the city again, but this time Elijah let the silence settle around him like a blanket instead of a wall. No music. No commentary, no nerves clawing at his chest. The road opened ahead of them, pines leaning inward as if forming a quiet corridor, the sky stretching clear, the hum of the wheels steady and sure. Arielle drove with one hand lightly resting on the wheel and the other draped over her knee. She didn't fidget. She didn't rush. She didn't fill silence with sentences meant to impress. She simply let the world be what it was. They reached the river clearing just before noon, the sunlight flickering across the water like soft strokes of color. Elijah stepped out first again, scanning the area with the instinct of someone who had learned to be cautious, even in calm places. Arielle walked past him, her steps leaving faint indentations in the grass. "It looks different in this light," she said. "The water's slower today." Elijah followed her gaze. The river was smoother than the day before, sliding over stones with a quietness that felt almost deliberate. They settled at the same spot on the pier, unwrapped their sandwiches, and tasted the warmth of caramelized onions melting into roast beef and toasted bread. It was a simple meal, but the simplicity was what made it sit gently in the air around them. For a long time, neither spoke. The clearing didn't require conversation. It felt like a place where thoughts could breathe without needing to be shaped into words. After a while, Arielle rested her hands behind her again, leaning back on her elbows. "I used to come here all the time with my grandmother," she said softly. "She used to tell me the river listened better than most people." "Did it help?" he asked. "Sometimes," she said. "Mostly on days when I didn't want to explain myself to anyone." Elijah nodded because he understood that kind of day, the kind where the world's expectations pressed too tightly to name, the kind where silence felt like the safest companion. Arielle watched the water for a moment before glancing at him. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Were you nervous? Yesterday, I mean?" He considered the question carefully. "Not nervous," he said. "Just cautious." "About me?" "About what this could be mistaken for," he said honestly. Arielle exhaled slowly, not in frustration but in understanding. "People like easy stories," she said. "Neat ones, predictable ones. They like putting things in boxes because boxes don't argue." "And we don't fit," he said. "No," she admitted. "We don't." The honesty didn't sting. It simply sat between them, as real as the river beneath their feet. He didn't respond right away, but the silence wasn't heavy. It was simply part of the truth they both recognized. Two lives that weren't built to overlap had somehow found a quiet corner where the lines blurred. Eventually, Arielle asked him another question, one that carried a hint of vulnerability beneath it. "Did you think about not coming today?" "For a moment," he said. "But then I realized I'd already made up my mind." She took that answer gently, the way she seemed to take everything, without squeezing too hard, without letting it slip through her fingers. A breeze brushed past them. The smell of warm earth and drifting water rose softly. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called once, twice, and then quieted. Arielle tilted her head, watching the way Elijah looked at the river. "What are you thinking right now?" He paused. "That I haven't sat still like this in a long time. Is that good or bad?" "Unexpected," he said, borrowing her own word from earlier. She smiled at that. A real smile. Not polite, not social, not staged. "You ever feel like the world keeps asking you to perform?" she asked. "All the time," he said. "What do you do?" "I work," he answered. "I fix things. It's the one place no one asks me to pretend." She nodded. "Same," she whispered. "Except instead of wires and lights, it's shapes and colors, trying to make sense of things without having to justify the way I feel." The two of them sat with that simple truth. His work stabilized currents inside walls. Hers stabilized currents inside herself. It was not lost on either of them that this was the first time they had said anything real about their lives without the weight of expectation between them. When he finally stood, shadows had stretched across the clearing. "I should be heading back." "Will you?" she asked again, the same softness as before. "Not if you ask me to stay," he answered again, more certain this time, and just like yesterday, she gave the same answer. "Then stay." He did. They talked until the air cooled and the sky deepened. And when he finally returned home hours later, he found himself opening his phone before he could sit down. A new message waited from her. A simple reminder written without punctuation. "Next time you bring the sandwiches." Elijah leaned against the arm of his couch and closed his eyes for a moment, letting the softness of the day settle inside him. For the first time in a long while, the silence in his apartment didn't feel like something pressing down. It felt like something opening up. Elijah didn't usually think much about Friday nights. Most weeks, they arrived quietly, slipped past him, and ended with him falling asleep on the couch, while some late-night home improvement show murmured across the room. But this Friday felt different from the moment he woke. The air held a kind of steady anticipation, like the breath before a soft chord settles into a song. He tried not to name it, but naming wasn't necessary. His chest already knew. Work filled the early part of the day. 2 outlet replacements, a breaker reset in a century-old house, and a humming panel in a downtown duplex that turned out to be caused by a single loose screw. He focused the way he always did, hands steady, mind sharp, senses tuned to the quiet details. But between jobs, his thoughts drifted back to the river clearing, to the taste of toasted bread and caramelized onions, to the way Arielle had leaned back on her elbows and asked him if he ever felt like the world expected him to perform. It had been a long time since someone wanted the answer instead of the polite version of it. Late that afternoon, while tightening a junction cover, his phone buzzed. He checked it without thinking. Arielle's name lit the screen. "Dinner? My place. Nothing fancy." He stared at the message longer than necessary before replying. "What should I bring?" Her answer came quick. "Just you. And maybe don't wear the boots." He looked down at his feet, dusty and scuffed. He smiled despite himself. By the time he stood at her door hours later, the sun had dipped low enough to scatter a golden warmth across the front steps. He held a small paper bag in one hand. Lemon butter biscuits warmed just enough to smell like a memory, and wore clean jeans with a gray button-up that had been sitting folded for months, waiting for an occasion that never came. Arielle opened the door slowly. She wasn't dressed up. No statement jewelry. No curated outfit. Just a soft cardigan, dark leggings, and bare feet sinking quietly into the hardwood floor. Her hair was loosely pinned, strands falling with gentle disobedience around her face. "Hey," she said. "Evening," he replied, lifting the paper bag. "I brought biscuits. Not homemade, but I warmed them." "That is the most comforting sentence I've heard all week," she said with a quiet laugh. "Come in." The warmth of roasted herbs drifted through the hallway. The kitchen glowed with soft light, candles flickering on the counter. 2 plates were set neatly on the island, and a tray of roasted salmon rested on the stove, its glaze catching the light like a soft sheen. "Hope you like salmon," she said. Elijah shook his head with a faint smile. "I like food I didn't have to cook." They settled at the island. The meal wasn't fancy. It didn't need to be. Slices of salmon, roasted vegetables, biscuits still warm, and a small bowl of lemon butter that Arielle insisted on placing right between them. Conversation came easily. Work stories, childhood mishaps, strange customers they had met over the years. Elijah told her about the summer he crawled under a house and got stuck for nearly an hour because the owner's cat decided his boots looked like territory worth guarding. She laughed so hard, she nearly spilled her water. When she leaned into her hand, resting her chin on her palm, she studied him quietly. "You have a quiet way of being loud," she said. Elijah raised a brow. "Is that supposed to be a compliment?" "Oh, absolutely. Most people talk to be noticed. You're noticed whether you talk or not." He didn't know what to do with that. Compliments that reached beneath the surface felt foreign. like tools he hadn't learned how to hold yet. After dinner, Arielle guided him to the living room. The couch was oversized, soft, and carried the faint scent of lavender. She folded herself into one corner, curling her legs beneath her. Elijah sat at the other end, straight-backed at first, hands resting neatly on his knees. "You can relax, you know," she said gently. "You're not in a waiting room." "I wasn't raised to slouch in someone else's house," he replied, half teasing but fully honest. She rolled her eyes lightly. "You're allowed to be comfortable here." It was a small permission, but it loosened something inside him. He leaned back a little, letting the couch hold more of his weight. Arielle nodded in approval. Outside the window, streetlights cast soft halos on the pavement. The house felt unusually quiet for a home as large as hers, as if it had been waiting for something to fill it besides curated art pieces and polite conversations with people who never stayed long enough to matter. "You ever think about what people might say?" she asked, eyes still on the window. "About what?" he asked, though he already knew. "You, me, this." Elijah let out a slow breath. "Probably a lot. Probably nothing good." Arielle nodded, a shadow of truth flickering across her expression. "My world is loud, Elijah. Not in sound, in expectations, in appearances, in the way people watch everything I do and try to shape me with their opinions." "You don't seem like someone who bends easily," he said. "That's exactly why they watch," she whispered. He looked at her then, really looked, and saw something behind her calm exterior. Not fear, exactly. Something closer to weariness. The exhaustion of being seen in the wrong ways by the wrong people for too long. "What about you?" he asked softly. "What scares you?" She held his gaze. "Not you." There was a pull in the air. Not urgent, not rushed. Just a slow recognition of something neither had named. The distance between them felt thinner than a breath, yet neither moved toward it or away. It simply existed, unhurried and present. Eventually, she stood and walked him to the front door. No kiss, no lingering touch. Just a shared moment under the porch light where the world seemed to quiet itself. "Thanks for coming," she said. "Thanks for the food," he replied. "You still owe me sandwiches," she reminded him. He gave a small nod. "Next time I'll even toast them." Arielle smiled, small, honest, and closed the door gently. Elijah walked down the steps feeling something stir inside him. Not adrenaline, not nerves, just a calm certainty that something meaningful had shifted, even if only by a fraction. The night air felt different as he crossed her yard. Quieter, softer. Like the beginning of a chapter. He wasn't sure he was ready to write, but felt strangely grateful to hold. The week after their quiet dinner began the way most of Elijah's weeks did. Steady, predictable, lined with work orders scribbled in his notebook. But beneath the routine, a faint ripple moved through him. Something had shifted, and though he couldn't name it yet, he felt it in the way he checked his phone in the morning, in the way the memory of Arielle's smile lingered longer than it should, in the way silence no longer felt like an empty room, but like the space between two breaths shared. Monday morning arrived with the sharp scent of sawdust and stale coffee inside the warehouse of Carter and Sons Electric. Elijah clocked in, nodded to the apprentices sorting cables, and went straight to the back, where he kept his diagnostic kit. He liked starting early. The world was quieter then, and he could hear himself think. Brooks. He turned. Raymond Cook, the owner, stood with a clipboard tucked under one arm, his expression gentle but guarded in that professional way men carried when they had something to say, but wished they didn't have to be the one saying it. "Got a minute?" Elijah nodded and followed him toward the office. The walk felt longer than usual. The younger techs paused their chatter as he passed, and though no one said anything, he sensed the shift. Silence in a place usually filled with banter meant only one thing. People knew something. Raymond closed the office door softly. "Whitmore Estate canceled their contract with us this morning." Elijah didn't react, not outwardly. Internally, a spark flickered, sharp, brief, but he kept his face still. "Any reason given?" he asked. Raymond hesitated, eyes dropping to the clipboard. "They said it's about maintaining their public image." The words landed exactly the way Elijah expected them to. Soft, polite, wrapped neatly in civility. But beneath them, he heard what wasn't spoken. He'd heard that tone all his life. People speaking in carefully arranged phrases so they didn't have to say the part that mattered. Raymond continued quietly. "You've done solid work for them for years. Best tech I've got. So, if there's something you want me to hear, now's the time." Elijah shook his head. "No, sir. I did the job the way I always do." "I know you did," Raymond replied. "Just wanted to make sure you're all right." "I'm fine," Elijah said. He wasn't. Not because of the cancellation itself, though it stung, especially since the Whitmores were one of their highest-paying clients, but because he already knew why it happened. All it took was one pair of watchful eyes, one social post, one whispered assumption, and suddenly the work he'd built with his hands meant less than an evening photograph taken out of context. He left the office with his jaw set, his steps steady, but something inside him tightened, an old, familiar knot returning after years of trying to forget what it felt like to be reduced to a rumor rather than regarded for his work. By lunchtime, he still hadn't shaken it off. So he went to the Wick Street Diner, the same place where he'd grabbed breakfast more times than he could count. He ordered coffee and a turkey melt, then sat facing the window, hoping the quiet would settle him. It didn't. Behind him, two men sat in a booth discussing something too animatedly to ignore. He wasn't listening until he heard one line carried on the low hum of their conversation. "Isn't that the guy with the rich designer on social?" Elijah's shoulders stiffened. "Yeah, that's him," the other man replied. "She's got him everywhere now. Kinda looks like a project she's polishing up." They laughed. Light, casual, cruel without meaning to be. The kind of cruelty people commit when they forget someone like Elijah has ears, history, a heart. He didn't turn. He didn't correct them. He didn't need to see their faces to know the type. Men who believed they could summarize a person with a few careless sentences. He finished his sandwich slowly, chewing past the bitterness gathering on his tongue. When he stepped out of the diner, the wind caught at his shirt, cool and sharp. He stood still for a moment beside his truck, palms pressed to the metal, letting the cold settle his nerves. He told himself not to let it get to him, but it did. It always did, no matter how hard he tried to pretend otherwise. By late afternoon, he returned home exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with labor. His apartment felt different that day, just a little too quiet, a little too small, like he had shrunk inside it. He didn't call Arielle, not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't want to bring this weight to her door. She didn't deserve to carry the burden of other people's narrow worlds, and he didn't want her to feel responsible for the things the world whispered about him. But she called him instead. It was nearly dusk when his phone rang. Elijah stared at the screen for a moment before answering. Her voice carried through, soft as always. "Are you free tonight?" she asked. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I have 2 milkshakes," she said, as though that solved something. "And I don't want the extra one to melt." He exhaled through his nose, a reluctant smile forming despite the ache in his chest. "I'll come by." When he arrived, she was sitting on the front steps, legs crossed, a milkshake sweating in each hand. The porch light hadn't come on yet, leaving her surrounded by the dimming glow of evening. She handed him the vanilla one without speaking. For a moment, they just sat there, sipping quietly. "Something happened," she said finally. Elijah didn't deny it. Whitmore canceled their contract. The diner, some folks said things. Arielle didn't interrupt, didn't gasp, didn't fill the air with apologies that weren't hers to give. She simply listened, her presence steady and undemanding. When he finished, she whispered, "I'm sorry for the world you have to walk through." "It's not your fault," he said. "No," she agreed softly, "but it still hurts me to see you carry it." He looked down at the milkshake in his hand. "People think I'm some sort of ornament, a performance." "You're not," she said, her voice gentle but certain. "You're a man with skill, with dignity, with depth. You don't get smaller just because they can't see the whole of you." He hesitated, then let the truth come out. "I don't want this noise to swallow me, or you." Her eyes softened. "Then let's take a breath. Together or apart, whichever you need." The honesty in her voice cut deeper than any judgment he'd heard that day. It wasn't pressure, it was permission. "I think," he said slowly, "I need space from all of this, just to think." Arielle nodded once. It wasn't anger, it wasn't disappointment. It was quiet acceptance, even though he could see the faint shadow it cast behind her eyes. "If space helps you breathe," she said, "then take it." He stood. She didn't reach for him. He didn't move closer. They simply looked at each other under the start of the porch light. As he stepped down the walkway, she rested her hand over her heart and said one last thing, not loudly, but enough for him to hear before he reached the street. "You're not a project, Elijah Brooks." He paused, just for a moment, then kept walking. But the words followed him long after he drove away. The first 2 days of space passed like shallow breaths, quick, stiff, and not nearly enough. Elijah expected the quiet to settle him. He expected the absence of Arielle's voice to clear the fog of other people's opinions. He expected distance to be protection. But the truth revealed itself slowly, like a light flickering through a half-closed door. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was hollow. Work filled his hours, but even the rhythm of his job, steady, precise, comforting in its predictability, felt slightly off. He tightened connectors that didn't need tightening. He rewound tape around wires already secure. His attention wandered, something it never did. When clients asked routine questions, he answered politely but mechanically, as if operating through static. Every evening, he returned home thinking he might sleep early. Every evening, he ended up sitting on the edge of his couch, elbows on his knees, staring at the silent glow of the lamp. The room felt heavier without her presence echoing in his thoughts. He replayed fragments of their last night on her porch, her hand on her chest, her voice steady, her eyes steady even when she said she'd give him the space he needed. "You're not a project, Elijah Brooks." The words should have healed him. Instead, they opened something deeper. By the 5th day, A storm rolled across the city, thick clouds pressing low, the air turning metallic the way it always did before heavy rain. Elijah sat behind the wheel of his truck, parked outside a grocery store where he'd picked up dinner, but suddenly lost interest in eating it. Fat drops of rain began striking the windshield, tracing slow paths down the glass. He watched them fall, one by one, line by line, until the rhythm formed something like truth. He missed her, not the version of her that people whispered about, not the image others tried to pin to her. He missed the way she asked questions that reached deeper than surface conversation. He missed how she gave silence room to breathe instead of treating it like an obligation to fill. He missed the way she made the world feel less staged. He had taken space to find clarity. Instead, the stillness sharpened every thought he had tried to quiet. The storm thickened, the rain now steady and insistent. Elijah placed both hands on the steering wheel, exhaled, then started the engine. He didn't plan the drive. His mind didn't need directions. His heart had already chosen the destination before he acknowledged it. Arielle's house appeared through the rain like a watercolor painting. Edges blurred, lights softened, the porch glowing faintly through the curtain of water. He parked beneath the old oak tree, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment, listening to the heavy drumming on the roof. A part of him wondered whether he should go home and try again tomorrow. But waiting had turned into its own kind of ache. He stepped out, rain soaking through his shirt in seconds. By the time he reached her door, water ran down his arms like thin streams of light. He knocked, quietly at first, then once more, uncertain. The door opened slowly. Arielle stood there in an oversized hoodie, sleeves pushed up, paint smudged along her wrist. Her hair was messy, tied back without attention. She didn't look startled to see him. She looked like someone who had been expecting a knock, not because she assumed he would come, but because she knew something in the world might arrive eventually. "Elijah," she said softly, "I shouldn't have just shown up like this," he murmured. "You can always show up," she replied, then stepped back. "Come in before you drown." The warmth of her home wrapped around him as soon as he stepped inside. The quiet felt different from his apartment, like a place built to hold emotions instead of mute them. The living room was dim except for a tall lamp in the corner. Canvases leaned against the walls, some half-finished, some nothing but splashes of dark color. On the easel stood a new painting, deep strokes of blue and charcoal swirling together, like a storm swallowing a piece of sky. Elijah stared at it. "That's new." "Therapy," she said simply, rubbing a speck of paint from her cheek. "Some days the only thing I can control is the color I pick up." He stepped closer to the painting. The storm inside it felt familiar, not chaotic, just honest about what storms felt like. Arielle sat on the floor with her knees drawn to her chest. She didn't ask him to sit with her, but she didn't need to. He lowered himself beside her, legs stretched out, his wet shirt clinging to his back. She didn't ask why he came. She let him breathe first. Rain clattered against the windows, each drop stitching the silence more tightly around them. Finally, Elijah spoke. His voice was low, not from hesitation but from truth. "I thought space would make things easier. I thought maybe if I stepped back, the noise outside would fade. But it didn't. It just got louder in my head." Arielle rested her chin on her knee. "Did you find what you were looking for?" "No," he admitted. "I just found out I didn't want the distance I said I needed." The confession felt like releasing a breath he'd been holding since he walked away from her porch. Arielle looked at him, not with relief or triumph, but with understanding. "I didn't want you to go," she said. "I just didn't want to be another weight you had to carry." "You're not," he said firmly. "The world is heavy enough. You're the part that feels steady." Her eyes softened. She stood, walked to a shelf, and pulled down a slim folder he had never seen before. When she returned, she placed it gently in his hands. "I didn't show you this earlier because I didn't want to add more noise," she said quietly. "But I don't want to hide it either." Inside the folder were dozens of printed screenshots, photos, and commentary. Grainy shots of him leaving her house, cropped images from the river clearing, speculation about their relationship, comments dissecting them with cold curiosity, as if they were a public experiment. Elijah felt heat rise in his chest. "How long has this been going on?" "Since that first weekend at the river," she said. "Someone recognized you. Then it spiraled. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you were already dealing with enough," she whispered. "And because I was trying to protect something I wasn't sure could survive too much scrutiny too soon." He closed the folder slowly. "There's no safe distance from prejudice," he said. "Whether I'm near you or not, they'll still have something to say." "I know," she replied. "The question is whether we let them write the story for us." He breathed out, long and steady. "I don't want to run from this, or from you." Arielle's expression softened into something that felt like evening sunlight after a storm. "Then tell me what you want." "I want to build something," he said. "Not around you, not for you. With you." She reached out, took his hand, and rested her fingers lightly over his. "Then stay," she whispered. "Not because you feel obligated, but because you want to." He squeezed her hand gently. "I'm here," he said, "and I'm not hiding." The rain softened then, tapping the windows like a quiet applause. They didn't move closer, didn't reach for more. They simply sat, side by side on her living room floor, letting the storm outside fade into something gentle while the storm inside them settled into something true. The rain finally loosened its grip over the city, leaving behind streets washed clean and air that smelled faintly of wet soil and quiet renewal. Over the next few days, Elijah and Arielle found a rhythm. Not hurried, not fragile, simply steady. They didn't talk about what had happened on the floor of her living room or the folder of invasive screenshots resting now in a drawer near her desk. They didn't need to. Truth had already been spoken. The rest was just breath. Sunday morning arrived with surprising warmth. Elijah stopped by the bakery on 5th Street, picking up their usual, the lemon butter biscuits she liked, and a cinnamon roll he pretended not to want, but always ate half of. He arrived at Arielle's house just after 9. She opened the door with the same soft smile that had lived in his mind all week. "You're early," she said, stepping aside. "You said 9, he replied. "And you're early," she repeated, teasing now. He set the biscuits on the counter, and for a moment they stood in the kitchen without rushing toward any conversation, letting the simple act of being there speak first. It didn't feel like the start of something new. It felt like continuing something they had already begun. Arielle made pour-over coffee in a small glass set, pouring the water slowly in circular motions. Elijah leaned against the counter, watching her in the quiet way he always did. Not out of hunger, but out of recognition. She worked with color, he worked with current, and yet both understood the same truth. When you cared, your hands moved differently. "What's on your mind?" she asked without looking up. "Just watching," he said. She smiled into the steam rising from the kettle. "That's dangerous. I might start believing I'm interesting." He shook his head gently. "You already know you are." When she finished preparing the coffee, she set both cups on the counter, her fingers brushing the rim lightly, as if ensuring the warmth settled evenly. Then she reached under the counter for a tablet he hadn't noticed before. "I've been working on something," she said. She handed it to him. The screen glowed softly, revealing a crisp logo, Carter Works, in clean lettering that felt both grounded and intentional. Below it, a simple image of a hand gripping a single bolt, drawn with lines that looked like they belonged on a blueprint. Elijah blinked. "What's this?" "A business identity," she said. "A real one. Not just your name scribbled on invoices. A brand. Something that belongs to you." He scrolled slowly. There were color palettes, a sample web page layout, a motto written in her handwriting, "Built with hands driven by heart." His grip tightened slightly on the tablet. "You did all this?" She nodded. "You build things. I design things. It felt natural." He tried to speak, but the words tangled. "Arielle, I don't know what to say." "Say what you feel," she said gently. He set the tablet down, palms flat on the counter. "I don't want people thinking you're saving me." Her eyes softened, not with pity, but with something steadier. "I'm not saving you. I'm investing in what you've already built with your own hands. It's the same way you taught me that the right connection can stabilize an entire room." She paused. "You gave me that metaphor during dinner, even if you didn't realize it." He exhaled. He had said something like that. Something about load distribution and grounding points, but he hadn't thought she'd taken it into her art, or her heart. "Just look at it," she said quietly. "If you don't want it, that's fine. But I think you deserve to see what your work looks like when it's treated with respect." So he looked again. This time, not as someone evaluating a design, but as a man seeing himself reflected in a way he had never expected. The layout honored his profession without romanticizing it. The logo felt like hands and hope stitched together. The tagline felt gentle, not loud. "This isn't charity?" he asked softly. "No," she answered. "This is partnership." He let those words settle. They felt right in the room, steady like the morning light. By the end of the week, Elijah had filled out the paperwork for a business license. He and Arielle walked to the print shop on Hall Street, carrying the tablet between them like a shared map, and printed a batch of flyers on thick matte paper. They laughed over fonts, over color saturation, over whether the shade called warm smoke gray looked more like smoke or more like the underside of a cloud. On Saturday morning, they walked together through neighborhoods, some quiet and tree-lined, some more worn but full of life, placing flyers on bulletin boards, slipping them into mailboxes, handing them directly to people who stopped to compliment the design. At one house, an older man with a cane answered the door. His skin had the warm undertone of sun-worn years, and his white hair curled around his ears. "You Brooks?" he asked, squinting at the flyer. "Yes, sir," Elijah said. The man tapped the paper with one finger. "Good hands matter," he said, then nodded once as if delivering a verdict. "I'll call you later this week." As they walked away, Elijah felt something open inside him, something small, like the first beam of sunlight reaching through clouds after a long storm. It wasn't pride exactly. It was recognition. Someone saw the work. Someone saw him. Arielle nudged his arm. "That smile looks real." He tried to hide it. Failed. Over the next 3 months, Carter Works grew, not in bursts, but in roots. Steady calls from neighbors, referrals from seniors, small jobs that led to bigger ones. Nothing dramatic, nothing viral, just quiet trust spreading through the community. During that time, Arielle made another decision. She rented a modest brick storefront on a quiet street, its large windows still smudged from years of disuse. She invited Elijah to see it one afternoon. Half the space she designated for his workshop. Tools hung neatly on pegboards, a sturdy workbench built from reclaimed wood, wiring diagrams framed and mounted like minimalist artwork. The other half she transformed into her own studio, a place of colors and canvases and long community tables where neighborhood kids could paint on Saturday mornings. "We can call it the Hartman and Brooks Studio," she said, "or something better if you think of one." He walked the length of the room slowly, fingers grazing the workbench. "Feels right," he murmured. They set up the space together, moving furniture, cleaning windows, arranging tools and paints side by side. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. Once a month, they hosted community fix-it days. Kids painted while Elijah inspected old lamps or repaired loose cabinet hinges. Arielle taught them how to mix colors and let feelings spill onto paper without apology. Elijah taught them how to wire a small circuit using simple, soft terms, explaining currents like gentle streams of energy moving through safe paths. A neighborhood mother said afterward, "This place, it feels like hands holding hands." Elijah didn't know what to say to that, but the words stayed with him long after everyone left. One evening, after locking up, he stood outside looking at the simple wooden sign hanging above the door. It didn't glow or flicker or shout. It just existed, quietly, the way all real things did. He felt Arielle step behind him, her warmth gathering against the cool night. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "Just thinking how strange it is to see my name on a building." "It looks right," she whispered. And he believed her. The studio settled into its new rhythm as summer pressed gently into the edges of the city. Morning light pooled across the hardwood floor, catching flecks of dust that looked almost golden as they drifted above the paint tables. Elijah arrived earlier than usual that Friday, unlocking the workshop side while the sky was still the soft blue of waking. He liked the quiet before the first footstep, before the first sound of tools or brushes, before the first decision had to be made. In the stillness, he could almost hear the room breathing. He was sorting a box of outlet covers when his phone buzzed. A number he recognized. An estate manager, Claudia Harrow, from one of the upscale neighborhoods north of town. "Elijah Brooks speaking," he answered. Her voice was brisk but polite. "We have an issue at the Darlington property in South Charlotte. The sunroom chandelier. It's shorting whenever it rains. Mrs. Darlington specifically asked for you." He blinked, a surprise. The Darlington family was old money, but not the kind that made a show of it. If they wanted him specifically, it meant something in the house trusted his hands. "I can be there in an hour," he said. When he arrived, the estate rose in front of him like a preserved photograph, columns framed by ivy, windows reflecting the soft morning light, a walkway wide enough to feel ceremonial. Elijah had worked here before, but never alone, never on a personal request. As he stepped inside, the faint scent of polished wood and lavender oil drifted through the air. Claudia led him down the hallway. The storm last night triggered the issue again. Mrs. Darlington said the flickering gave her a headache. He nodded as he followed her. Probably the moisture in the wiring cage. I'll check the grounding lines. What you always told us, she said. A room stays calm when its connections are secure. He almost smiled. He had said that once, years ago, in passing. He didn't know they'd remembered. The sunroom was wide and filled with glass, the chandelier hanging like a suspended constellation. He set his tools on the floor and tested the fixtures. The wiring was delicate, antique, the kind that required patience rather than force. He had opened the small metal compartment above the chandelier when he heard footsteps behind him. Slow, intentional, familiar only in the way wealth taught people to walk like they owned the silence around them. Elijah Brooks, a man's voice said, low and polished. I wondered when I'd finally meet you. Elijah looked down from the ladder. A tall man in a tailored charcoal suit stood in the doorway, arms folded, expression curious in the way a person might be curious about a riddle rather than a human being. Jonathan Pierce. The name struck instantly. Arielle's ex-fiancé, a corporate lawyer from one of the boards her family's circle admired. Elijah descended the ladder slowly. Morning. Jonathan stepped forward with a smile that felt like a verdict already written. So you're the man everyone's talking about. I try not to pay attention to talk, Elijah said. Oh, you should, Jonathan replied lightly. It says more than people admit. He circled the room casually, picking up a porcelain bird from a shelf, then putting it down as though passing judgment on its weight. His eyes drifted back to Elijah. Arielle always did like unusual choices, painters, travelers, men who worked with their hands. He shrugged. Her father indulged it until it became inconvenient. Elijah kept his voice even. I'm here to fix the chandelier, Mr. Pierce, not to discuss her. Jonathan chuckled softly. Of course. You're a professional. Then he tilted his head. But humor me a moment. Do you really think this? He gestured vaguely, as if pointing at Elijah's entire life. Is permanent? Elijah understood the subtext. He had heard it before in a dozen different forms, sometimes said outright, sometimes delivered in glances. But Jonathan carried it with the confidence of someone who assumed his world was the default. I build things that last, Elijah said, tightening the last wire, including myself. Jonathan smiled, sharp, pleased. A poetic answer. Arielle always had a weakness for poetry in people. Elijah didn't rise to the bait. Is Mrs. Darlington here? I'd like to test the main line before the next rainfall. She's in the library, Jonathan said. She'll be happy you came. He paused at the doorway. But for what it's worth, Elijah, people in our world get tired of rebellions. They always return to what makes sense. Elijah turned the power back on. The chandelier glowed, steady, beautiful, unwavering. Then it's a good thing I'm not a rebellion. Jonathan's expression faltered for the first time, as if he had forgotten to consider that possibility. He left without another word. When Elijah finished packing his tools, Mrs. Darlington herself appeared, silver hair pinned neatly, wearing a soft wool sweater the color of early fog. You're very good at what you do, she said simply. Thank you for coming. Her tone held no judgment, no ulterior motive, just appreciation. He felt steadier as he left, but the moment stayed with him, the way Jonathan had spoken as though Elijah were temporary, like a passing phase, something novel rather than real. The words didn't break him, but they bent something inside. Not because he believed them, but because he had heard versions of them all his life. He drove straight to the studio. Arielle was painting when he arrived. A canvas stretched across the wall and streaked with long lines of blue, white, and gold. She turned when she heard him enter, wiping her hands on an old cloth. "You're back early," she said. Elijah sat on the stool beside her. "Ran into someone." She waited. No pressure, no rush. "Jonathan," he said. The name stilled her hand, not with fear, just memory. "What did he say?" she asked quietly. Elijah recounted the conversation, the tone, the assumptions, the way the man spoke, as if Elijah's presence in Arielle's world was a temporary detour on her way back to sense. Arielle listened with her arms folded loosely, leaning against the table. When he finished, she exhaled through her nose, slow and controlled. "I'm sorry," she said. He was always more concerned with appearances than with truth. He said, "People like you go back to what makes sense." Her jaw tightened. "And he thinks he makes sense?" "He thinks I'm temporary," Elijah murmured. Arielle stepped closer, brushing her fingers across the back of his hand, grounding him. "Elijah, people who measure permanence by comfort will never understand what it means to build anything real." He didn't speak for a moment. "What if your world demands you choose?" She looked at him then, her expression clear as winter light. "If they draw a line, I'll burn the line to the ground?" He swallowed. "They already drew it." "Then we build on the ashes," she said, her voice steady. Later that night, they climbed to the studio rooftop, where the city sounded like a distant hum and the breeze lifted their hair gently. They stood side by side, not touching, simply sharing the same horizon. Elijah looked over the quiet streets below. "Do you ever get tired?" he asked. "Of them?" "Yes," she said. "Of us?" "No." He nodded. "Then neither do I." The wind carried their silence upward, soft and sure. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a decision. It was simply two people standing at the edge of their separate worlds and choosing, without hurry, to remain side by side. The next morning unfolded with the kind of gentleness that tried to pretend the world outside was quiet. Sunlight stretched across the work tables at the studio, landing on jars of brushes, folded cloths, and coils of copper wire neatly arranged on the workshop side. Elijah arrived early again, unlocking the door before anyone else stirred on the block. He swept the floor, wiped down the counters, and checked the inventory list for upcoming Community Fix-It Day. Routine steadied him, but underneath that routine, one truth kept tapping quietly inside him. The encounter with Jonathan had left an imprint deeper than he wanted to admit. It wasn't the insult itself. It wasn't even the tone. It was the reminder that someone out there believed he was temporary, something to be tolerated until Arielle outgrew him or returned to the path someone else had mapped. He didn't believe Jonathan, but he couldn't pretend the world didn't think like him. Around mid-morning, the studio door opened with the chime Arielle had insisted on installing because soft sounds should mark beginnings. She stepped in wearing paint-streaked jeans and a linen shirt, her hair pulled back in a loose twist that threatened to fall apart at any moment. "You're early," she said, echoing the last time she'd found him already here. "You're predictable," he replied gently. "My greatest flaw?" she joked, setting down her bag. Her smile faded when she studied him more closely. "Something's off?" Elijah didn't hide it. "Just thinking." "About him?" "About all of it." Arielle walked around the workbench to stand closer. "Elijah, whatever Jonathan said, whatever tone he used, it wasn't truth. It was projection. People like him confuse stability with sameness." Elijah exhaled softly. I know. But it still echoes. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it, expecting a client or her gallery contact. Instead, her face shifted, subtly but sharply. What is it? He asked. She turned the screen toward him. A headline stared back. Design icon Arielle Hartman and her electrician partner. A story of image, intentions, and convenient narratives. A blog. A small one Elijah had seen circulating sometimes. The Queen's Ledger, known for its snide commentary disguised as cultural analysis. This time, they had chosen Arielle and him. Elijah felt his stomach tighten. Arielle opened the article with a single tap. The words spilled out like someone peeling back privacy without consent. Photos lifted from her social media, cropped to emphasize moments taken out of context. The river clearing, the studio, the walk through the neighborhood distributing flyers. Quotes warped into implications. Their community work reframed as savvy marketing. His name dissected, his craft minimized, his intentions questioned. They don't know us, Arielle whispered. They don't want to, Elijah replied quietly. Halfway down the page, a paragraph froze him. Sources close to the Hartman circle suggest that Arielle's relationship with her electrician companion may be the latest in her artistic rebellions. Much like her shift toward community-focused installations, this partnership appears driven by emotional novelty rather than meaningful compatibility. Arielle closed her eyes. That's not even subtle. Elijah swallowed hard. It's designed not to be. Another paragraph dragged a different wound into the light. Observers note that Brooks's recent branding and business expansion coincides directly with his public alignment with Hartman. Some question whether this collaboration is symbiotic or strategically opportunistic. Arielle set the phone down with a trembling breath. This is not journalism. This is cruelty wearing vocabulary. Elijah leaned against the edge of the counter, grounding himself. They turned our work into a performance, our community days into strategy, my business into a stepping stone. They're trying to shrink you to fit their story, she said, to make you look like a footnote in someone else's narrative. And it's working, he admitted, at least for people who want to believe it. The room grew quiet. In that silence, the weight of the article settled over them like fog. Not loud, not dramatic, just heavy. Arielle walked to the window, pushing her hair back. I could call the editor, she said. I could threaten legal action. It'll only feed them, Elijah said. I could issue a statement. They'll twist it. She turned to him. Then what do we do? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he crossed the room to the shelf where she kept her sketchbooks. Pulling out a blank one, he set it on the table between them. We tell our story, he said, in our words, not as a fight, as truth. Arielle stared at the blank page. Where do we start? With what we are, he said softly, not what they say. She took a pen from the jar, then another. Sit with me, she said. They wrote, not scripted statements or polished responses, just pieces of their truth. How Carter Works was born from skill, not image. How the studio existed because their worlds collided, not because someone curated it. How they both carried histories the public didn't earn the right to summarize. After a long stretch of quiet writing, Arielle looked up. It needs a frame, something that says what we stand for without screaming it. Elijah leaned back, thinking. Then he said, You once told me people draw lines around things they fear. She nodded. Then call it that, he said. A letter about what love looks like outside the lines other people draw. Her eyes softened. A letter. She opened her laptop, pulled their notes together, and wrote the headline, "When We Love Outside the Lines." Her fingers moved with clarity, not anger. She wrote about him, not as an ornament or rebellion, but as a partner. She wrote about work, not performance, about community, not publicity. She wrote about their shared refusal to let narratives built from distance define the truth built from closeness. When she finished reading aloud, the studio felt changed, like a room where a window had been cracked open after days of stale air. "We should publish it," she said. "Where?" Elijah asked. "Narrow Path Journal. They actually fact-check." He nodded. "Do it." She pressed submit. For the first time since reading the blog, her shoulders loosened. 2 hours later, her phone vibrated again. This time, it was a message from a local radio producer. "We read your letter. Would you and Elijah join us for an 18-minute segment on NPR Charlotte? We want to discuss community, partnership, and the right to shape one's own story." Arielle stared at the screen, stunned. "Elijah..." He took the phone gently, read the message twice. "They want us to speak." She nodded. "Not defend, speak." "That's different." "It is," she said. "And you deserve to be heard for who you are, not who they imagine you to be." He handed the phone back to her. "Then I'm in." The decision wasn't loud. It wasn't a declaration. It was simply a steady step toward reclaiming the voice they had almost let others steal. The morning of the NPR interview arrived with a kind of quiet that felt almost ceremonial. Not heavy, not anxious, just deliberate. Elijah woke before dawn, long before his alarm could buzz. He sat at the edge of his bed for a moment, letting the stillness gather around him. The soft hum of the streetlights outside drifted through the blinds, broken only by the early birds starting their cautious songs. He rubbed his palms together, not out of nerves but out of habit, the same motion he used before beginning a repair job, as if grounding himself through touch. He dressed simply, a soft navy shirt, clean jeans, boots polished without shine. He didn't want to look different or rehearsed or curated. He wanted to look like himself, the man who fixed things, the man who built a small business with his hands, the man who chose truth over comfort. When he arrived at the studio building, Arielle was already there, leaning against the brick wall in the soft light of morning. She wore a white linen blouse and charcoal trousers, her hair in a low twist, strands falling gently around her face. Not styled, not staged, just her. "You slept?" she asked. "A little," he said. "Me too," she replied. Then she smiled. "Let's go tell the truth." The NPR building was smaller than Elijah imagined. Instead of a grand hall or bustling newsroom, it felt intimate. Clean hallways, quiet studio doors, a mild smell of coffee drifting from a corner table. The receptionist greeted them with a warmth that felt unforced. "Good morning. You must be Elijah and Arielle. The producer will be right out." A few minutes later, the producer, a woman in her late 40s with soft gray curls, guided them into a recording room. The walls were lined with foam panels, shaped in gentle angles like folded paper. 2 microphones stood waiting in front of cushioned chairs. A low lamp cast a warm glow across the table. "You'll be speaking with our host, Dana," the producer said. "She likes conversations to feel natural, not scripted. Just be yourselves." "Being ourselves is the entire point," Arielle replied quietly. The producer smiled knowingly and slipped into the control room. A moment later, a voice floated through the speakers. "Good morning. I'm Dana. Thank you both for being here. A door opened softly, and the host entered. A woman with calm eyes, a warm smile, and a presence that filled the room without pressing down on it. She shook their hands gently and sat across from them, placing her notes aside. "We'll start in about 30 seconds, Dana said. "No need to rehearse. Just tell me what matters to you." When the red recording light blinked on, Dana leaned forward slightly, as though inviting them into a conversation rather than an interview. "Today," she began, "we're speaking with two members of our Charlotte community, designer and artist Arielle Hartman and electrician and small business owner Elijah Brooks. They've recently become the subject of public conversation, some of it thoughtful, much of it less so. But instead of responding in anger, they wrote an open letter titled, 'When We Love Outside the Lines.' And today, they're here to speak for themselves in their own voices." Elijah inhaled slowly. The moment felt real in a way he hadn't prepared for. Dana turned to him first. "Elijah, would you tell us what it means to build something, anything, without wanting to prove yourself to people watching from the outside?" He nodded once, grounding his voice. "For me, building has always been quiet. Wires don't ask for attention. Circuits don't care who you are. They only ask to be handled with respect and patience. So when people started making noise about me, about us, it felt strange because my whole life has been about working, not performing. I build because that's who I am, not because someone's looking." Dana's expression softened. "And how did it feel when your work, your intentions, even your relationship were framed publicly in a way that didn't reflect the truth?" Elijah considered his words carefully. "It felt like someone tried to write my name using the wrong alphabet. Like they took pieces of me and rearranged them until I didn't recognize myself." Arielle looked at him, the quiet weight of agreement settling between them. Dana shifted to Arielle. "Your open letter resonated with many people. Why did you write it?" Arielle folded her hands on the table. "I wrote it because silence can feel like consent, and I wasn't willing to let strangers define someone I love with ideas built on fear or habit. Elijah isn't a concept. He isn't an ornament. He isn't a rebellion. He's a man with integrity, and our story is ours, not theirs." Dana nodded gently. "What struck me most in your letter was the line about choosing to build instead of choosing to defend. Could you speak to that?" Arielle nodded. "Defending is exhausting. It keeps you stuck in someone else's narrative. Building is forward motion. It's creation. It's saying, we exist beyond your assumptions, and we will continue to grow whether you approve or not." Elijah added quietly, "And growth is slow. It's not flashy. It's hands and time and trust." The conversation flowed with a softness Elijah didn't expect. Dana asked about the studio, the community fix-it days, the kids who painted with Arielle while Elijah repaired lamps for their grandparents. She asked about what partnership meant to them, not romantically, but as two people weaving their work and values into something shared. At one point, Dana said, "You two speak with such calm, even when talking about pain." Arielle smiled faintly. "Storms don't always make noise. Some of the hardest ones are quiet." Elijah nodded, but quiet storms still change landscapes. Dana let the silence breathe before continuing. "What do you hope people understand after hearing you today?" Elijah answered first. "That we're not trying to be symbols, or statements, or exceptions. We're just trying to live honestly." Arielle added, "And that people should be careful with their narratives, because they shape lives they don't understand." When the segment ended and the red recording light dimmed, Dana stood and offered her hand. "Thank you," she said sincerely. That was needed. Outside, the morning light had grown brighter, catching on the tops of the trees and the edges of parked cars. Elijah and Arielle stepped out into the stillness. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Like something heavy shifted," he said. "Off your shoulders?" "No," he replied softly. "Into the right place." They walked to the car side by side, not speaking for a while, letting the new weight settle, not as burden but as grounding. Later that afternoon, the segment aired, quietly, without promotion. But people listened. A retired teacher sent a handwritten note thanking them for speaking kindly in an unkind time. A church pastor emailed Elijah saying, "Your voice reminded me that dignity is a daily choice." Small business owners offered referrals. Parents thanked Arielle for creating a space where their kids felt safe to create. Even strangers sent messages that simply read, "Saw you, heard you, thanks." The Queen's Ledger posted a follow-up article attempting to reclaim the narrative, but it didn't travel far. Something had shifted. Not through defending, through building. That evening, Elijah returned to Arielle's porch, the same place where he once asked for space and found clarity in return. She sat wrapped in a blanket, a cup of warm tea in her hands. "You came back," she said softly. "I didn't really leave," he admitted. She looked up at him with eyes that held no expectation, only truth. "Are you scared? Of losing this?" he asked. "Always." "What about now?" He took a breath, feeling the calm settle through him like a quiet answer. "I'm not scared of them anymore, just of how much this matters." Arielle set her tea down and touched his hand lightly. "That's not fear, Elijah. That's weight, the kind you choose to carry." He sat beside her, letting the warmth of her presence blend with the coolness of the night. And for the first time in a long time, the weight felt exactly like something meant to belong. The days after the NPR interview did not burst open with triumph. They didn't bring fireworks or loud declarations. They unfolded slowly, the way dawn eases its way across a sleeping neighborhood, quiet at first, then gradually brightening everything it touches. Elijah noticed it in small ways. When he walked through the studio doors, there was a calm waiting for him that hadn't been there before. When he visited clients' homes, the air carried a warmer kind of curiosity rather than the sharp, assessing glances he was used to. People still talked, yes, but the tone had shifted just slightly, like a dial moved from suspicion toward understanding. Carter Works began receiving calls from places not usually within Elijah's reach. Small medical practices, local bookstores, a few modest restaurants wanting electrical updates before autumn. Nothing extravagant, nothing loud. Just steady work blooming from word of mouth. A rhythm formed. Mornings fixing circuits or outlets. Afternoons helping Arielle rearrange the studio furniture for kids' art days. Evenings settling into a silence that felt more like rest than retreat. On a Wednesday near the end of September, Arielle stood in the doorway of the workshop, her hair tied into a careless knot. A strip of gold paint brushed across her wrist. "Come with me," she said, offering no explanation. Elijah wiped his hands on a cloth and followed her out the door. They walked down Belmont Avenue, the trees above them shedding yellow leaves that drifted lazily in the warm breeze. She led him to a modest two-story house with white siding, a red front door, and a driveway cracked in 3 distinct lines like an old scar. It sat quietly, as if waiting for someone to see past its age. "What do you think?" Arielle asked. Elijah studied the house. It wasn't grand like her family's estate. It didn't have a sculpted yard or perfectly framed windows, but it had a porch that looked like it wanted to hold stories. It had a front door that felt welcoming rather than imposing. It had rooms, he imagined, that carried more real air than curated decoration. "It looks warm," he said. Arielle smiled. "I put an offer on it this morning." He blinked. "For you?" "For us," she corrected gently. The world quieted for a moment, not with shock, but with the softness of something falling into place. Elijah inhaled slowly, as if testing whether the air around him had changed. It had. He felt it settle deep in his chest. They walked inside. The floors creaked in familiar, forgiving tones, the kind that felt lived in rather than old. Sunlight filtered through the living room windows, drawing long beams across the wooden floor. Arielle led him through the kitchen, the hallway, the small back room. "This one," she said, touching the doorframe. "I was thinking, maybe a mural." "A mural," he repeated. "I want the first stroke to start with hands. Your hands. Working hands." He didn't speak at first. His thumb brushed the grain of the doorframe, feeling the history beneath the paint. "You really want this?" "I do," she said simply. "Do you?" He turned toward her, feeling something inside him, a mixture of gratitude, disbelief, and quiet certainty. "Yes," he whispered. 2 weeks later, the house became theirs. They moved in slowly, not in a rush of boxes and noise, but in quiet steps. Elijah brought his tools first. Arielle brought her canvases. Together, they brought their small rituals. Biscuits on Sundays, late-night tea on weekdays, music playing low while they worked in separate rooms, but stayed somehow deeply connected. On the morning of the studio opening, the air felt crisp, like a deep breath waiting to be released. They arrived early, unlocked the doors, and turned on the lights. Arielle adjusted the art tables, while Elijah set out his newly organized toolkit. Their apprentices, Marcus Lee and young Aaron, prepared the front area for guests. By mid-afternoon, the Hartman and Brooks studio glowed with life. People drifted in. Neighbors, clients, families from the community days, small business owners who had read the open letter, retirees who had heard the NPR segment. Kids rushed to the tables with brushes in one hand and juice cups in the other, laughing as they mixed colors. Arielle took the small microphone first. She didn't prepare notes. She didn't need them. Her voice rose gently above the room's soft hum. "We built this place slowly," she said, "because the best things don't arrive polished. They arrive real, and we wanted this space to hold more than paint or wiring or tools. We wanted it to hold stories, people, hands learning to create and repair and rewrite what was broken." She paused, eyes softening. There's a difference between being given something and being trusted to build it. This place didn't fall from the sky. It came from work, from days of doubt and days of hope, and from choosing each other even when the world had questions. The room grew quiet, the kind of quiet that rises when truth fills the air gently, without force. Then Elijah stepped forward. He wasn't used to microphones, so he held it lightly, as if it might disappear if he gripped too hard. "I used to think," he said, voice steady but low, "that the only thing I'd ever own was a toolbox, something simple, something I could hold with both hands. But life has a strange way of handing you things that weigh more than you expect." He glanced toward Arielle, then back to the crowd. "Hope is heavy, partnership is heavy, community is heavy, but it's the kind of weight worth carrying. The applause that followed wasn't loud. It wasn't thunderous. It was steady, warm, honest. Later that evening, after the last guest had left and the studio lights had dimmed, Elijah and Arielle walked home along the quiet sidewalk. Leaves crunched under their steps. The sky had turned a muted amber behind the trees. When they reached their house, the porch light clicked on automatically. They stood beneath it, wrapped in a single blanket they had grabbed on their way out, the chill of the night brushing against their cheeks. Elijah exhaled, a breath that felt like release. "I didn't think I'd ever have something like this." Arielle rested her head on his shoulder. "You didn't get it by luck," she said softly. "You built it." He looked out at the street, at the faint glow of the studio sign a few blocks away, at the quiet houses shaped by lives he didn't know. "We didn't just survive their story," he murmured. "No," she said, tightening her grip on his hand. "We wrote our own." The night wrapped around them gently, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and fresh paint and warm hope. Hope that no longer had to hide, no longer had to explain itself, no longer had to defend its right to exist. Hope that finally had a home.